The idea seemed crazy, unbelievable, even to Tom himself. He sat at his kitchen table, the unpaid bills stacked high like a precarious tower about to topple. Foreclosure notices, credit card statements, and medical expenses formed a landscape of despair. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the weight of his failures pressing down on him. How had he gotten here? He used to have dreams, ambitions. Now, he was drowning. He looked at his wife, Sarah, asleep on the couch. Her face, usually bright and full of laughter, was etched with worry lines. He hated that he was causing her so much stress. He wanted to provide for her, to give her the life she deserved. But his small business had failed, the economy was tanking, and every avenue he explored seemed to lead to a dead end. That's when he stumbled upon it, an article about insurance fraud. A dark thought flickered in his mind, a desperate gamble. He dismissed it at first, horrified by the idea of deceiving people and causing harm. But the bills kept piling up, the phone calls from creditors became more frequent, and the shame grew heavier. He started researching. He learned about different types of insurance fraud, the loopholes, and the risks. He discovered that faking a death at sea was a surprisingly common, albeit risky, scheme. He read stories of people who had successfully pulled it off, and others who had been caught and faced severe consequences. The more he researched, the more the idea took root in his mind. It was a terrible plan, he knew. But it was also the only one he could see that could potentially save Sarah from financial ruin. He could take out a large life insurance policy, disappear, and she would be set for life. She would be sad, of course, but she would eventually move on and find happiness. At least she wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. He knew it was wrong. But he felt trapped, like a cornered animal. He convinced himself that he was doing it for Sarah, that it was an act of love. He pushed aside the moral implications, the potential consequences, and focused on the details. He needed a foolproof plan, one that would leave no trace. He began to meticulously plot his escape, unaware that his desperate act would soon unravel in the most unexpected way. The weight of the decision settled heavily on Tom. This wasn't some game, it was his life, and Sarah's future. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. He needed a plan so airtight, so believable, that no one would ever suspect a thing. He spent hours online, studying maritime law, weather patterns, and even the migratory habits of sharks. He became an expert in things he never imagined he'd need to know. He decided on a specific location, a remote stretch of coastline known for its unpredictable currents and frequent storms. He would purchase a small, used boat, nothing fancy, something that wouldn't attract attention. He'd file a false report claiming he was going on a solo fishing trip. Then, he would sail out into the open water, stage an accident, and disappear. The details consumed him. He researched how to make the boat look convincingly wrecked, how to scatter debris in a way that would appear natural. He even considered planting a fake body, but the risk of being discovered was too great. He would have to rely on the assumption that he had drowned at sea. He started buying supplies, rope, flares, life vests, and other nautical equipment. He paid in cash, avoiding any paper trail. He stored everything in a rented storage unit, a nondescript space in an industrial park. He visited the storage unit late at night, under the cover of darkness, feeling like a criminal. Meanwhile, he began increasing his life insurance policy. He told Sarah it was a smart financial move, a way to secure her future. She questioned it, but he brushed aside her concerns, telling her not to worry about it. He hated lying to her, but he convinced himself that it was for her own good. He also started practicing his new identity. He grew a beard, changed his hairstyle, and adopted a different posture. He even practiced speaking with a different accent. He knew that if he were ever recognized, he would need to be able to convincingly deny his true identity. The plan was coming together. It was complex, risky, and morally questionable. But Tom was convinced that it was the only way out. He was a man drowning in debt, desperate to save his wife from financial ruin. He was willing to risk everything, even his own life, to give her a second chance. The day of his fishing trip was fast approaching, and Tom felt a mixture of fear and determination. He was ready to put his plan into action, unaware that fate had a different plan in store for him. The morning of the fishing trip dawned gray and ominous, mirroring the turmoil in Tom's heart. He kissed Sarah goodbye, a long, lingering kiss filled with guilt and a desperate hope that he was doing the right thing. He told her he loved her, a sentiment that felt both genuine and tainted by his deception. He drove to the marina, the old boat secured to a trailer behind his truck. He launched the boat into the choppy water, the waves already starting to pick up. He filed his false fishing report with the harbor master, a gruff old man who barely glanced at him. Tom felt a pang of conscience, knowing he was involving this innocent man in his elaborate lie. As he sailed further out to sea, the coastline receded into the distance. He reached the designated spot, a treacherous area known for its strong currents and hidden reefs. He took a deep breath and began to put his plan into action. He opened a valve in the hull of the boat, allowing water to slowly seep in. He then used a hammer to smash the radio and disable the engine. He scattered some of his belongings around the deck, creating the illusion of a struggle. He donned a life vest, even though he knew it wouldn't save him. The boat started to list precariously, the waves crashing over the bow. Tom felt a surge of panic, but he forced himself to remain calm. He knew that he had to commit to the plan, no matter how frightening it seemed. He jumped into the frigid water, the shock taking his breath away. He swam away from the sinking boat, fighting against the strong current. He knew that he had to disappear quickly, before anyone came looking for him. He swam towards a small, uninhabited island, a rocky outcrop that he had scouted out weeks earlier. He reached the island exhausted and shivering, his body battered by the waves. He collapsed on the shore, grateful to be alive. He spent the next few days hiding on the island, living off of the supplies he had stashed there. He watched as the Coast Guard searched for him, their boats and helicopters combing the waters. He felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. He was officially dead. Tom waited until the search was called off before finally making his way to the mainland and starting his new life. He was gone, but he left behind a wreckage of lies and a wife who believed he was lost at sea. The wreckage of Tom's boat was discovered a few days later, scattered across the rocky coastline. The authorities concluded that he had been caught in a sudden storm and had likely drowned. The news spread quickly, and Sarah was devastated. She wept for days, unable to comprehend the sudden loss of her husband. The community rallied around her, offering their support and condolences. They organized a memorial service for Tom, a somber affair filled with tears and fond memories. Sarah delivered a heartfelt eulogy, praising Tom's kindness, his generosity, and his unwavering love for her. She spoke of their dreams for the future, dreams that would now never come to fruition. Meanwhile, Tom was settling into his new life. He had chosen a small town in a different state, far away from his old life. He adopted a new identity, a new name, and a new profession. He found work as a handyman, fixing things around town. He kept to himself, avoiding any close relationships. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, afraid of being recognized. The insurance company, after a thorough investigation, deemed Tom's death accidental and began processing Sarah's claim. She received a substantial sum of money, enough to pay off her debts and start a new life. She was grateful for the financial security, but it came at a terrible price. She moved into a smaller house, a modest bungalow on the outskirts of town. She started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding solace in caring for the abandoned animals. She began to rebuild her life, slowly but surely. She often thought of Tom, wondering what his last moments were like. She imagined him struggling against the waves, fighting for his life. She prayed that he hadn't suffered. She missed his laughter, his warmth, his touch. She couldn't imagine ever loving anyone else. Unbeknownst to Sarah, Tom was living a double life, haunted by his guilt and his lies. He missed her terribly, but he knew that he could never go back. He was trapped in his own web of deceit, forever separated from the woman he loved. He was a ghost, living in the shadows, waiting for the day when his past would finally catch up with him. He had no idea that day was coming sooner than he thought, in the aisles of an ordinary grocery store. Months had passed since Tom's disappearance. The leaves had changed color, fallen, and new buds were beginning to appear on the trees. Life in their small town continued, albeit with a lingering sadness in the air. Sarah was slowly healing, finding strength in her volunteer work and the support of her friends. Across the country, in a bustling city far removed from Sarah's quiet existence, Mary, their former neighbor, was visiting her daughter, Emily. Mary was a kind, observant woman, the type who always knew what was happening in the neighborhood. She had been deeply saddened by Tom's supposed death, often bringing Sarah casseroles and offering a comforting shoulder to cry on. Emily had recently moved to the city for a new job, and Mary was thrilled to spend a week with her, exploring the sights and catching up on her life. One sunny afternoon, they decided to go grocery shopping at a large supermarket near Emily's apartment. As they strolled through the aisles, Mary was struck by the sheer variety of products. She marveled at the exotic fruits and vegetables, the gourmet cheeses, and the endless rows of packaged goods. She was so engrossed in the sights and sounds of the supermarket that she almost didn't notice him. He was standing in the produce section, examining a head of lettuce. He had a beard now, and his hair was styled differently. But there was something about his eyes, the way he held his head, that seemed strangely familiar. Mary squinted, trying to get a better look. She felt a jolt of recognition, a sudden surge of adrenaline. It couldn't be, she thought. It was impossible. But the more she looked, the more convinced she became. It was Tom. Her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe her eyes. Tom was supposed to be dead, lost at sea. What was he doing here, alive and well, shopping for groceries? She struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. Was she mistaken? Was it just someone who looked remarkably like him? Or was it really Tom, living a lie, while his wife grieved for him back home? She knew she had to find out. Mary's mind raced. She had to be sure. She couldn't accuse someone of being a fraud based on a hunch. But the resemblance was uncanny. The way he tilted his head, the slight twitch in his left eye, it was all so familiar. She nudged Emily. "Honey, do you see that man over there, by the lettuce?" she whispered. Emily glanced over. "Yeah, what about him? Does he look familiar to you?" Mary asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Emily shrugged. "Not really." "Why?" Mary hesitated. She didn't want to alarm her daughter, but she needed another opinion. "He reminds me a little of someone I used to know," she said vaguely. "Maybe you should go say hello," Emily suggested, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside her mother. Mary's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't just walk up to him and ask if he was Tom. That would be insane. But she had to do something. She couldn't let this opportunity pass. She decided to be subtle. She slowly maneuvered her shopping cart closer to him, pretending to examine the tomatoes. She listened intently, hoping to hear him speak. He picked up a head of lettuce and turned it over in his hands, inspecting it carefully. Then, he spoke to someone nearby, a young woman with bright red hair. "These don't look very fresh," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Mary froze. It was him. She was sure of it. The voice was different, deeper than she remembered, but it was unmistakably Tom's. She felt a wave of anger wash over her, followed by a deep sense of betrayal. How could he do this? How could he put Sarah through so much pain? She wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation. But she knew that she couldn't risk making a scene. She needed to gather evidence, to prove that he was who she thought he was. She reached into her purse and pulled out her cell phone. Pretending to take a picture of the tomatoes, she quickly snapped a photo of Tom. The picture wasn't great, it was blurry and taken from an awkward angle. But it was enough. It was proof. She had found Tom. Now, she just needed to figure out what to do with it. Back at Emily's apartment, Mary felt a nervous energy coursing through her veins. She kept looking at the blurry photo on her phone, zooming in and out, trying to convince herself that she wasn't mistaken. The picture was grainy, and Tom's face was partially obscured by a bag of lettuce. But the more she looked at it, the more certain she became. It was him. She knew that she couldn't keep this to herself. Sarah deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. But she also knew that she needed to be absolutely sure before she said anything. She couldn't risk causing Sarah more heartache based on a mere suspicion. She scrolled through her contacts, searching for someone who knew Tom well, someone whose opinion she trusted. She landed on Martha, another neighbor who had lived next door to Tom and Sarah for years. Martha was a practical, no-nonsense woman, the kind who always spoke her mind. If anyone could identify the man in the photo, it was her. She quickly composed a text message, "Martha, I need your help. I'm visiting Emily and I saw someone in a grocery store who looks a lot like Tom. I took a picture, but it's not very good. Can you take a look and tell me what you think?" She attached the photo to the text and sent it off, her fingers trembling slightly. She waited anxiously for a response, pacing back and forth across Emily's living room. Every ping of her phone made her jump. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, her phone buzzed. It was Martha. Mary took a deep breath and opened the message. "Mary, that's him," Martha wrote. "I'm 99% sure. He's got a beard and different hair, but it's definitely Tom. What's going on?" Mary felt a wave of relief wash over her, mixed with a surge of anger. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined it. Tom was alive. And he had been living a lie all this time. Now, she knew what she had to do. She had to tell Sarah. She typed out a quick response to Martha, "I'll explain later. Just promise me you won't say anything to anyone until I do." She knew that delivering this news to Sarah would be the hardest thing she had ever done. But she also knew that it was the right thing to do. Sarah deserved to know the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. She picked up the phone and dialed Sarah's number, her heart pounding in her chest. She only hoped that Sarah would be able to forgive her for bringing this pain back into her life. Mary's phone call to Sarah was the hardest conversation of her life. She started cautiously, explaining that she had been visiting Emily and had seen someone who looked familiar. She described the man in the grocery store, the beard, the different hairstyle, but the unmistakable glint in his eyes. Sarah listened in stunned silence, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was impossible. Tom was dead. She had seen the wreckage of his boat, attended his memorial service, grieved for him for months. Mary then sent Sarah the blurry photo. Sarah stared at it for what seemed like hours, her heart pounding in her chest. She zoomed in on the man's face, searching for any sign that it wasn't him. But the more she looked, the more she realized it was true. It was Tom. Alive. The shock quickly turned to anger, a burning rage that consumed her. How could he do this to her? How could he put her through so much pain, so much grief, only to be alive and well, living a new life somewhere else? She felt betrayed, humiliated, and utterly heartbroken. The tears started to flow, a torrent of grief and anger. She screamed, she sobbed, she threw things across the room. She couldn't comprehend the magnitude of his deception. She had loved him, trusted him, believed in him. And he had repaid her with this cruel and elaborate lie. After the initial outburst subsided, Sarah felt a cold, steely resolve settle over her. She wouldn't let him get away with this. She wouldn't let him profit from his deceit. She would make him pay for what he had done. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and picked up the phone. She dialed the number of the insurance company, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to report a fraud," she said, her voice filled with righteous anger. "My husband, Tom, is not dead. He faked his own death to collect the insurance money." She explained everything to the insurance representative, recounting Mary's story and describing the photo. The representative listened attentively, taking detailed notes. He assured Sarah that they would investigate the matter thoroughly and bring Tom to justice. Sarah hung up the phone, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. The wheels of justice had been set in motion. And Tom's carefully constructed lie was about to come crashing down around him. The insurance company took Sarah's claim of fraud very seriously. They had dealt with similar cases before, and they knew that it was crucial to act quickly and discreetly. They immediately assigned a seasoned private investigator named Jack Stratton to the case. Jack was a gruff, no-nonsense man with years of experience in tracking down missing persons and uncovering fraud. He had a reputation for being relentless and resourceful, and he was known for his ability to blend in and gather information without raising suspicion. He started by reviewing Sarah's file, studying the details of Tom's disappearance and the insurance claim. He examined the police report, the Coast Guard search records, and the medical examiner's report. He also reviewed the blurry photo that Mary had taken of Tom in the grocery store. He decided to travel to the town where Mary had spotted Tom. He checked into a small motel and began his investigation. He started by visiting the grocery store where Mary had seen Tom. He spoke to the manager, showing him the photo and asking if he recognized the man. The manager studied the photo carefully. "I think I've seen him around," he said. "He comes in here every few days. I think his name is Bill, maybe. He works as a handyman in town." Jack felt a surge of excitement. He was on the right track. He spent the next few days canvassing the town, showing the photo to local business owners and residents. He learned that Bill was a quiet, unassuming man who kept to himself. He was known for his skills in carpentry and plumbing, and he was always willing to lend a hand to those in need. Jack discovered where Bill lived, a small apartment above a hardware store. He staked out the apartment, watching for any sign of Tom. He waited patiently, knowing that it could take days, or even weeks, to gather the evidence he needed. He also researched Bill's background, searching for any connection to Tom. He discovered that Bill had no prior criminal record and no known relatives. His social security number was legitimate, but it had been issued only a few months ago. Jack knew that he was close to cracking the case. He had a strong suspicion that Bill was Tom, but he needed more concrete evidence. He needed proof that would stand up in court. He decided to dig deeper, to uncover the secrets that Bill was hiding beneath his carefully constructed facade. He installed surveillance equipment near Tom's apartment and began documenting his every move, hoping to catch him in a slip-up that would expose his true identity. CK's surveillance paid off. He meticulously documented Bill's daily routine, recording his comings and goings, his interactions with other people, and his spending habits. He discovered that Bill always paid in cash, never used credit cards, and avoided any situation that might require him to show identification. He also obtained copies of Bill's bank records, which showed that he had a modest savings account with a local bank. The deposits were small and infrequent, but they added up over time. Jack traced the source of the deposits and discovered that Bill was receiving regular payments from a landscaping company in a nearby town. He decided to pay a visit to the landscaping company. He spoke to the owner, showing him the photo of Bill and asking if he recognized him. The owner confirmed that Bill worked for him part-time, mowing lawns and trimming hedges. He described Bill as a reliable and hard-working employee, but he also mentioned that he was a bit of a loner. Jack asked the owner if he had any information about Bill's past. The owner said that Bill had told him that he had moved to the area a few months ago from out of state. He didn't know anything else about him. Jack returned to his motel room, feeling a sense of satisfaction. He had gathered enough evidence to confirm that Bill was indeed Tom. He had documented his new identity, his new location, and his new life. He had also uncovered evidence that linked him to the insurance fraud. He prepared a detailed report for the insurance company, outlining his findings and providing copies of all the evidence he had gathered. He recommended that they contact the local authorities and arrange for Tom's arrest. The insurance company was thrilled with Jack's work. They immediately contacted the local police department and presented them with the evidence. The police chief, after reviewing the report, agreed to cooperate. He assigned a team of detectives to work with Jack to plan Tom's arrest. They knew that they had to be careful. Tom was a skilled liar and a master of deception. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. They needed a plan that was foolproof, one that would catch Tom completely off guard. They decided to arrest him at his workplace, the landscaping company, hoping to catch him by surprise before he had a chance to escape or destroy any evidence. The trap was set, and Tom was about to walk right into it. CK and the local detective spent hours meticulously planning Tom's arrest. They studied the layout of the landscaping company, noting the entrances and exits, the location of the office, and the number of employees. They wanted to minimize the risk of Tom escaping or causing harm to anyone. They decided to approach the landscaping company in unmarked cars, hoping to avoid arousing suspicion. They would arrive early in the morning, before Tom had a chance to start his workday. They would surround the building, cutting off all possible escape routes. 2 detectives would enter the office and ask to speak to Bill. They would show him a photo of Tom and ask him to confirm his identity. If he denied it, they would confront him with the evidence they had gathered and arrest him on suspicion of insurance fraud. Jack would remain outside, monitoring the situation and providing backup if needed. He had a feeling that Tom wouldn't go down without a fight. He had spent months carefully constructing his new life, and he wouldn't give it up easily. The day of the arrest arrived, and the detectives gathered at a nearby staging area. They reviewed the plan one last time, making sure that everyone knew their roles and responsibilities. They were nervous but determined. They knew that they were about to bring a long and complex investigation to a close. They drove to the landscaping company in silence, their hearts pounding in their chests. They parked their cars a short distance from the building and approached on foot. The morning was quiet and still, the air filled with the scent of freshly cut grass. The 2 detectives entered the office, while Jack and the other detectives took their positions around the building. The detectives in the office asked the receptionist to direct them to Bill. She pointed to a man working in the back, mowing the lawn. The detectives approached Bill cautiously. He was wearing a pair of overalls and a baseball cap, his face partially obscured by the brim. One of the detectives spoke to him, his voice calm and authoritative. "Excuse me, sir. Can we have a word with you?" Tom stopped mowing and turned to face the detectives, his expression unreadable. The trap had been sprung. Tom, or Bill as he was now known, looked up, his eyes widening slightly behind the brim of his baseball cap. He had been so lost in his work, the rhythmic hum of the lawnmower a soothing balm to his troubled mind, that he hadn't noticed the 2 men approaching. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. He knew instantly that something was wrong. The men were dressed in plain clothes, but there was something about their demeanor, their posture, that suggested they were authority figures. One of the detectives pulled out a photo and held it up. "Is this you, sir?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Tom glanced at the photo. It was an old picture of him, taken years ago, before he had grown the beard and changed his hairstyle. He felt a jolt of fear, a cold dread that spread through his veins. He knew that his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. He hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to do. He could deny it, try to bluff his way out of it. But he knew that it was no use. The detectives had found him. His past had finally caught up with him. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The detective stepped closer. "We know who you are, Mr. Tom. We know about the insurance fraud. We know about the faked death. Tom's heart sank. He knew that it was over. He had been living on borrowed time, always looking over his shoulder, waiting for the inevitable. Now, the moment had arrived. "You're under arrest," the detective said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Tom didn't resist. He knew that it would be futile. He allowed the detectives to handcuff him and lead him away. As he was being escorted to the police car, he glanced back at the landscaping company. His co-workers were staring at him in disbelief, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had betrayed their trust, deceived them with his lies. He had ruined his life, and he had hurt so many people in the process. As the police car pulled away, Tom closed his eyes and braced himself for what was to come. He knew that he would be facing serious charges, and he knew that he would likely spend many years in prison. He had made a terrible mistake, and he was finally paying the price. His life as Bill was over. Tom was back, and he was under arrest. Following his arrest, Tom was held in a local jail while authorities worked to arrange his extradition back to his home state, where he would face the full weight of the law. The news of his arrest spread quickly, making headlines across the country. People were shocked and outraged by his audacious scheme. Sarah, in particular, was devastated. She had already grieved for him once, and now she had to grapple with the reality that he was not only alive but had also deliberately deceived her and exploited her emotions. She felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and a profound sense of loss. The extradition process was relatively swift. Tom offered no resistance, knowing that it was futile to fight the charges against him. He was transported back to his home state under police escort, his face pale and drawn. He was immediately booked into the county jail and charged with multiple felonies, including insurance fraud, filing a false police report, and identity theft. The prosecution team was determined to make an example of him, hoping to deter others from attempting similar schemes. Tom was assigned a public defender, a young and inexperienced lawyer who was overwhelmed by the complexity of the case. The lawyer advised Tom to remain silent and not to speak to the media. Meanwhile, the prosecution team began preparing their case. They interviewed Sarah, Mary, Martha, and other witnesses who could testify against Tom. They gathered financial records, phone logs, and other evidence that would prove his guilt. The media descended on the small town, eager to cover the sensational trial. The courthouse was packed with reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers. The trial was expected to be a long and drawn-out affair, filled with dramatic testimony and legal wrangling. Tom sat silently in the courtroom, his eyes downcast, as the prosecution presented their case. He knew that the odds were stacked against him. He had made a terrible mistake, and he was now facing the consequences of his actions. He could only hope that the jury would show him some mercy. But deep down, he knew that he didn't deserve it. He had betrayed his wife, his friends, and his community. He had only himself to blame for the situation he was in. He was ready to face the music, whatever it might be. The trial began with a palpable tension in the courtroom. Tom sat at the defense table, his face pale and gaunt, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Sarah sat in the front row, her expression a mixture of anger and sadness. She had agreed to testify against Tom, despite the emotional toll it would take on her. She felt it was her duty to ensure that he was held accountable for his actions. The prosecution called Sarah as their first witness. She took the stand, her hands trembling slightly. She recounted their life together, their financial struggles, and the events leading up to Tom's disappearance. She described how Tom had become increasingly withdrawn and secretive in the months before his death. She testified about the life insurance policy, explaining that Tom had insisted on increasing the coverage, claiming that it was a smart financial move. She admitted that she had been hesitant at first, but that Tom had convinced her that it was the right thing to do. She then described the day of Tom's fishing trip, recalling the lingering kiss he had given her before leaving. She choked back tears as she spoke of the devastation she had felt when she learned that his boat had been found wrecked and that he was presumed dead. The prosecution presented evidence of Tom's financial troubles, including unpaid bills, foreclosure notices, and credit card statements. They argued that Tom had been motivated by greed and desperation, and that he had faked his own death to collect the insurance money. The defense attorney attempted to discredit Sarah's testimony, suggesting that she had been complicit in Tom's scheme. He argued that she had known about the insurance fraud all along and that she was now trying to distance herself from it. Sarah vehemently denied the allegations, insisting that she had been completely unaware of Tom's plan. She maintained that she had been a victim of his deception, just like everyone else. The prosecution then called Mary and Martha to the stand. They testified about seeing Tom in the grocery store and identifying him from the blurry photo. Their testimony further strengthened the prosecution's case. The evidence was mounting against Tom, and the jury appeared to be paying close attention. The atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy with anticipation, as everyone waited to see what the defense would do. The prosecution then shifted its focus to the evidence gathered by Jack Stratton, the private investigator. Jack took the stand, his voice calm and authoritative, and detailed his investigation. He explained how he had tracked down Bill and confirmed his identity as Tom. He presented the jury with photographs of Tom working at the landscaping company, mowing lawns and trimming hedges. He showed them pictures of Tom's apartment, his car, and his bank account. He played surveillance recordings of Tom speaking to his coworkers, using his new name and adopting a different accent. He presented copies of Tom's bank records, which showed that he had been receiving regular payments from the landscaping company. He also presented evidence that Tom had been using a false social security number and a fake driver's license. The prosecution argued that this evidence irrefutably proved that Tom had faked his own death and had been living a new life under a false identity. They argued that he had deliberately deceived his wife, his friends, and his community, and that he deserved to be punished for his crimes. The defense attorney attempted to poke holes in Jack's testimony, questioning his methods and suggesting that he had been biased in his investigation. He argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that it didn't definitively prove that Tom was guilty of insurance fraud. He pointed out that the photographs were grainy and that the recordings were difficult to understand. He argued that Tom could have had a legitimate reason for using a false social security number and a fake driver's license. The prosecution countered these arguments by presenting additional witnesses who testified that they had seen Tom in the grocery store and identified him from the blurry photo. They also presented expert testimony from a handwriting analyst who confirmed that Tom had signed the insurance policy and the false police report. The evidence against Tom was overwhelming. The prosecution had built a strong and compelling case, and the jury appeared to be convinced of his guilt. The defense attorney faced an uphill battle. He knew that it would be difficult, if not impossible, to convince the jury that Tom was innocent. His best hope was to persuade them to show him some mercy. The defense's case rested primarily on arguing mistaken identity and a lack of definitive proof. Tom's lawyer presented a series of character witnesses who testified that Tom was a kind and generous man, incapable of committing such a heinous crime. They argued that the prosecution's case was based on circumstantial evidence and that there was no concrete proof that Tom had faked his own death. They suggested that Bill was simply a man who looked remarkably like Tom, and that Mary and Martha had been mistaken in their identification. They also argued that Tom could have had a legitimate reason for using a false social security number and a fake driver's license, perhaps to escape from an abusive relationship or to protect his identity from creditors. The defense attorney delivered a passionate closing argument, pleading with the jury to consider the possibility that Tom was innocent. He argued that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Tom had committed the crimes he was accused of. However, the evidence against Tom was overwhelming. The prosecution had presented a mountain of evidence that irrefutably proved that he had faked his own death and had been living a new life under a false identity. The photographs, bank records, and witness testimonies all pointed to the same conclusion: Tom was guilty of insurance fraud and related crimes. The jury listened intently to the closing arguments, their faces etched with concentration. They knew that they had a difficult decision to make. They were being asked to decide the fate of a man who had committed a terrible crime, a man who had betrayed his wife, his friends, and his community. After the closing arguments, the judge instructed the jury to begin their deliberations. The jury retired to a private room, and the courtroom fell silent. Everyone waited anxiously for the verdict, wondering what the jury would decide. Tom sat at the defense table, his head in his hands, bracing himself for the worst. He knew that his life was about to change forever. After several hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed with reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers, all eager to hear the outcome of the trial. Tom sat at the defense table, his face pale and drawn, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Sarah sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. The judge entered the courtroom and asked the jury foreman to read the verdict. The foreman stood up, his voice trembling slightly, and announced that the jury had found Tom guilty on all counts. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Tom closed his eyes, his head sinking to his chest. He had known that it was coming, but it was still a devastating blow. He had ruined his life, and he was now facing the consequences of his actions. Sarah remained stoic, her face betraying no emotion. She had mixed feelings about the verdict. On the one hand, she was relieved that Tom had been held accountable for his crimes. On the other hand, she was saddened by the fact that their life together had ended in such a tragic and bitter way. The judge thanked the jury for their service and dismissed them from the courtroom. Tom was immediately taken into custody and led away to jail. He would remain there until his sentencing hearing, which was scheduled for a few weeks later. The media swarmed around Sarah as she left the courthouse, peppering her with questions. She declined to comment, saying only that she was grateful for the support of her friends and family. The verdict in Tom's case sent a clear message to anyone contemplating insurance fraud: crime does not pay. Tom had faked his own death in an attempt to collect insurance money, but his scheme had unraveled, and he was now facing a long prison sentence. His life was in ruins, and he had only himself to blame. The long nightmare was finally over. Now, only the sentencing remained. Weeks later, Tom appeared in court for his sentencing hearing. The judge, after hearing arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, handed down a significant prison term. Tom was sentenced to 15 years in prison for insurance fraud, filing a false police report, and identity theft. He was also ordered to pay restitution to the insurance company. Tom stood silently as the judge delivered the sentence, his face expressionless. He knew that he deserved it. He had made a terrible mistake, and he was now paying the price. He was led away to prison, his life in ruins. Meanwhile, Sarah began the long and difficult process of rebuilding her life. She sold the house they had shared, paid off their remaining debts, and started fresh in a new town. She continued to volunteer at the animal shelter, finding solace in caring for the animals. She also began attending therapy, seeking help to cope with the emotional trauma she had endured. She learned to forgive Tom, not for his sake, but for her own. She realized that she couldn't let his actions define her life. She started to focus on her own happiness, pursuing her passions and surrounding herself with positive and supportive people. She took up painting, joined a book club, and started traveling. She discovered that she was stronger and more resilient than she had ever imagined. Years passed. Tom remained in prison, serving his sentence. He had little contact with the outside world, and he spent his days reflecting on the mistakes he had made. He often thought of Sarah, wondering if she had ever forgiven him. He knew that he had hurt her deeply, and he regretted his actions every day. Sarah, on the other hand, flourished. She rebuilt her life, finding happiness and fulfillment in unexpected places. She learned to trust again, and she eventually found love with another man, a kind and gentle soul who treated her with respect and compassion. She finally found the peace and happiness that she had long been searching for. She was free from Tom's lies and debt, and she was ready to embrace the future. Her new life was everything Tom's life wasn't. Tom's story serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of fraud and the importance of honesty. What began as a desperate attempt to escape debt and provide for his wife spiraled into a web of lies and deception that ultimately destroyed his life and caused immense pain to those around him. His actions not only violated the law but also betrayed the trust of his wife, his friends, and his community. He chose a path of dishonesty, believing that it was the only way out, but he soon discovered that the price of deception is far greater than any financial reward. Tom's story also highlights the importance of integrity and ethical behavior. In a world where people are often tempted to cut corners and take shortcuts, it is essential to remember that honesty is always the best policy. Dishonesty may provide short-term gains, but it ultimately leads to long-term consequences. Sarah's story, on the other hand, is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Despite enduring unimaginable pain and betrayal, she found the strength to rebuild her life and create a brighter future for herself. She learned to forgive, to trust again, and to find happiness in unexpected places. Her story is an inspiration to anyone who has ever been hurt or betrayed. It demonstrates that it is possible to overcome even the most difficult challenges and to emerge stronger and more resilient than before. In the end, Tom's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of fraud and the importance of honesty, while Sarah's story is a beacon of hope and resilience. Their lives serve as a reminder that choices have consequences, and that honesty and integrity are always the best path forward. The pursuit of wealth or success should never come at the expense of one's moral compass. The true measure of a person is not what they have, but who they are, and how they treat others. And in this story, the choice between right and wrong had life-altering repercussions for everyone involved. The ripple effects of Tom's dishonesty served as a painful, but ultimately powerful, lesson.